motion before the House is this House has no confidence in Her Majesty's government. It's my pleasure to look to the first speaker, Beatrice Barr, Treasurer-elect, St. Peter's College, to open the case for the proposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Oxford Union and to this, the first debate of our academic year. In particular, a warm welcome to the freshers who braved not only the weather, but the first debate. I hope you aren't as bemused as I was, and I've got to apologise in advance because I'm going to be coughing throughout this speech. It's an honour to open this debate on a motion which the Union has considered in its first debate every year for almost the last 2 centuries. But surely there's something a bit different about 2019. Since last year's debate, we have a new government, or rather, a new Tory leader elected without a mandate of the general public, or more specifically, with a mandate of 0.13% of the general population. And not a representative 0.13% of the population. Tory members. Older, whiter, and more male than the country at large. Members who elected a man who once ran this place, and much to our discredit. Not only does this leader and this government lack a mandate, but it lacks a majority too. A majority which the Prime Minister chose to shed in the kind of cavalier political decision which has characterised his premiership. All that said, my first point of criticism has got to be not this, but the government's utter selfishness in choosing a day to get a Brexit deal. Surely, with all his pandering to the tactics of the Oxford Union, the Prime Minister would have the courtesy to not make side proposition rewrite our speeches at midday. But ladies and gentlemen, as I introduce tonight's opposition, I invite you to consider all that I've just said. Not my personal beef with the government's timing, but the basic facts of the Johnson government. Whether, if considered entirely independently of the parties or the personalities involved, we could possibly declare confidence in a government with no mandate for a policy agenda and no majority to pursue it. With that, it's my honour to introduce the opposition speakers for tonight. Speaking first is Chen Kai-shih, a second-year PPist at Brasenose College and the Secretary of the Oxford Union. Chen Kai is a marvellous hack. Not only here, but in the long game of securing that Tory safe seat, having appeared only last term in a #BackBoris video. I hope he feels almost as proud to represent the 0.13% as he does to speak alongside an opposition bench he described as a nightmare from the Cameron years. I look forward to following him in 20 years' time as he fights valiantly to finally get Brexit done. Speaking second is the Right Honourable Nicky Morgan MP, the MP for Loughborough and Secretary of State for Digital Culture, Media and Sport, and a former Treasurer of the Union. She previously served as Education Secretary under David Cameron, making her something of a pariah of my school days, holding a joint portfolio as Minister for Women and Equalities, a job the Tories repeatedly deem insufficiently important to make a minister's full portfolio. Indeed, Nicky Morgan's career seems to have been one of brilliant luck. Despite backing Johnson's greatest frenemy, Michael Gove, in the Tory leadership contest, and supporting a soft Brexit, she somehow found her way into Johnson's hard Brexit cabinet. That said, she is a fantastic MP and an inspiring former committee member of this place. Not that her competition is particularly steep. Speaking third is the Right Honourable Graham Brady MP, who spent most of the past decade as chair of the 1922 Committee of Tory Backbenchers. He's also the MP for Altrincham and Sale West, one of the safest Tory seats in the country, or at least until Chen Kai comes running for it. Earlier this year, he tabled an anti-Northern Ireland backstop amendment, so I'm looking forward to hearing his take on tonight's events. Mr. President, these are your opposition speakers, and they are most welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, in order to win tonight's debate, I will seek to demonstrate 3 things. First, that the vision of Boris Johnson and his government is fundamentally bad for Britain. Second, that the specific context of our political climate makes them not only bad, but actively dangerous. And third, that even if, despite this, you're a die-hard no-deal Tory, you will still be let down by this government. I was tempted to start this speech with a list of facts about how Boris Johnson is another Eton and Oxford educated posh boy who can possibly claim to represent a diverse nation. And then I realised how that might go down in this room. So instead, I'm going to start with his record. At every point in his career, the Prime Minister has screwed up. Not like had an affair, screwed up, or like, I don't know, mixed up Justin Trudeau and Emmanuel Macron, screwed up. No. He's got a British citizen imprisoned in Iran, screwed up. Described Obama as having an ancestral dislike for Britain, screwed up. Lied on the side of a big red bus, screwed up. Described Muslim women as letterboxes and compared gay marriage to bestiality, screwed up. His career literally started with getting fired for making up copy. And I'm bringing up these gaffes not to embarrass the Prime Minister or tonight's opposition bench, though that is a lovely byproduct, but because they tell us something more important about his cavalier attitude to government. Boris's constant bluffs, whether to the EU or to the Iranian government, prove that all politics is to him a game, and not in a strategic way, in a way that demonstrates that he sees it as constant competition, a competition which he has to win. Brexit isn't actually about securing the will of the people. It's about beating the EU, Jean-Claude Juncker, the Irish, insert his enemies here. The national interest doesn't actually factor into any part of his equation. Moreover, nobody says things like this that cause literal diplomatic crises for no reason. They do so because, for instance, in the context of Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe, the British citizen imprisoned in Iran thanks to a Boris screw-up, they haven't bothered to do even the most basic research about a case which it's their job and duty to solve. Or, in the case of all of his borderline racist comments, because they're not very good at covering up their own prejudices. Of course, this country isn't governed by the Prime Minister alone. The whole government runs the country, and it's the whole government which must fail the test of our confidence. Every member of Johnson's cabinet is in position because they have agreed, whether tacitly or explicitly, to sacrifice their own principles to the Prime Minister's vision of Brexit, as well as to the schoolboy tactics he's using to try and get there. In the case of one of the members of the opposition bench, they have entirely sacrificed their vision of a soft Brexit in return for a seat on the front bench. The policy and the tactics, they might be the Prime Minister's and those of his cronies, but every member of the cabinet, the government, is complicit in propping him up. And the behaviour that I've talked about so far, it's not only dangerous, but it's detrimental to the very status of British politics itself. In attempting to prorogue Parliament, for instance, to prevent the country's elected representatives from having any control over Brexit, he not only attempted to bypass the British constitutional system, but ended up causing even more damage than he intended, with the crisis of confidence in the British courts arising from the Supreme Court decision. But maybe I'm being idealistic and expecting this government to behave in any normal way. But I'll remind you that it's not only its decisions which are questionable, it's actually actively failing. Ladies and gentlemen, Boris Johnson inherited a government with a working majority of 2, and in only a couple of months, he's left himself more than 20 MPs short of a majority. It's for this reason that even the most diehard of Tories amongst you are going to find themselves disappointed. Johnson put the nail in his own coffin, not through electoral losses, because no party really wants us to go to the polls right now, but because of his own political failure, or perhaps that of the wannabe Moriarty at his right hand in the form of Dominic Cummings. In taking the cavalier gamble that culling his own party would impose absolute political hegemony on the government benches, he's not only insulted the most blue-blooded of Tories, though I'll leave Chenkai to answer for that one, but prevented his own government from introducing any meaningful change whatsoever. Even if, by some act of God, the government suddenly decided that it cared about the plight of the 300,000 homeless people in Britain, or the 4 million in deep poverty, it literally could not do anything about it because it can't get anything through Parliament. And that's a direct result of Boris Johnson's own decisions. Just this week, we saw the farce of a Queen's speech that the government has neither hope nor will to deliver. Boris Johnson promised new criminal justice legislation, transport reform, animal welfare, new building safety standards, name your friendly policy. In a lovely pre-election shopping list for a Prime Minister who has no hope of passing any legislation whatsoever, thanks to his own choices, as I'll keep reminding you. He believes that the only way to fulfill these pledges is to get Brexit done and to deal with them later. But with the continuation of the Brexit process ad infinitum, it's simply an election wish list that's never going to happen.
Points of information?
No, thank you. The Prime Minister has intentionally cut the limbs off his own parliament on the basis of an all-consuming belief in his own rightness. I challenge the opposition bench to argue that these selfish, childish political games are the behaviour of a government in which we should have confidence, as opposed to of a man who never quite got over losing the Union presidency the first time he tried. But finally, and I know you've all been waiting for this moment, let's talk about the Brexit deal. Boris Johnson returned from Brussels today with a deal which he has no hope of passing, much like Theresa May before him. A deal which, may I add, he ran in a Tory leadership election on essentially the basis of not getting. The Tories' desperate attempts to appease the hardest of Brexiteers without actively, destroying the country, are responsible for what is now a series of failed Brexit deals, which will never pass Parliament, and which, if implemented, would honestly hardly be better for the nation than no deal at all. But even if the DUP, which the government still depends on for confidence and supply, were to back the deal, it would shoot itself in the foot, as the Irish border problem remains unsolved, merely delayed for 4 years, as under today's deal, the joint government has the ability to vote to exit the EU customs rules over 4 years. I remind you that there is actually no executive in Northern Ireland at the moment, so this kind of gets tangled up in itself. If the DUP doesn't support the bill, thereby not allowing it to pass automatically, the government's only hope of passing it could be the support of Labour MPs, who, as of today, are almost certainly going to make it conditional on a referendum amendment. So the government has the option of either deciding not to pass the deal at all, or to continue the Brexit process over and over with a new referendum. Thus it continues and Brexit never ends. But say Juncker stays true to his word and doesn't grant us an extension, and we leave with no deal on the 31st of October. Then we spend months negotiating our new place in the world economy. The internal battles about Brexit don't go away. They're superseded by, say, the transformation of the People's Vote campaign into a pro-EU campaign, the re-emergence of Scottish nationalism, even more debates in Northern Ireland, which we're still forgetting about, or with a sitting Duck government, which is unable to either govern with its current majority or to enlarge its majority at the polls, because it can't accept that it's simply very unpopular. So whether this deal or no deal, we will, as a nation, be let down. Thus, whether you're a die-hard Remainer or Marc-Francois in the flesh, you cannot possibly have confidence in this government, and it is literally guaranteed to fail you, whoever you are and whatever your priorities may be. Thank you.